Once Jesus' fame began to spread, people asked him for a lot of things. People asked him for healing the sick. That was one of the big things that they would come to him for. They would ask for him to cast out demons, something that we don't really deal with today, but certainly was a scourge at that time. They asked him for wisdom. They asked him to explain something. Sometimes they asked him for things that were not really appropriate for them to ask for, or that he was not willing to offer. One such situation we find in Luke 12. Someone comes to him and they say, "Lord, I want you to make my brother divide the inheritance with me." We're not told which brother this is. It probably, in this context, might have been the younger sibling, because the older sibling might have had a more easy time blocking out their siblings out of the will, since the older one usually received more. But whoever this was, he is unhappy with how the inheritance of his father has been divided, and apparently he has been cut out, and he wants Jesus to interfere in that. Based on what he says, it seems like he might even have a case. He might have legitimately been wronged. But Jesus' response is very interesting. If you look there in Luke 12, he says, "Who made me a judge or an arbiter over you?" That might sound funny coming from Jesus, because he is going to be the one who judges in the last day, right? But that's not what he's talking about. Yes, that is his role to judge in the last day, but this kind of judgment, he doesn't want anything to do with. This isn't his deal. He says, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And then he tells a parable. It's a very short parable. It's a very simple parable, but it's a parable that I want us to look at together this morning. He says, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store my grain and all my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods, stored up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God.'" This morning, I want us all to ask ourselves a question. I want us to ask, how's my retirement? Not in the sense of how is my retirement going for those of you who are retired. Talking about the retirement like what you're setting aside for retirement, or if you are retired, what you're pulling out of retirement. How's my retirement? That's really what he's talking about here, isn't it? This man is profitable in his career. He's able to set aside a lot. He's able to say, "You know what? I can just kick back and relax now. I can just do whatever I want to do now." Around here, the fields part might still be accurate to many of our experiences. Maybe the barns, not so much. We don't usually keep what we grow around here in barns. We sell it, and then we take the proceeds of that, stick it in the bank. Maybe we say, my fields have produced plentifully. I'm going to take the proceeds of that. I'm going to invest it. I'm going to put it in the bank. I'm going to set it aside. And then once I have a certain amount set aside, I have enough to retire. I have enough set aside for many years. I can now eat, drink, and be merry. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? Isn't that normal? Isn't that what we all want to do? I mean, for crying out loud, y'all, I went to business school. I learned how to do this kind of stuff. This is normal. This is what you do. You set aside for retirement. What is Jesus saying? Is he condemning that? Is he saying we shouldn't be responsible and set aside our money? Well, I don't think that's what he's saying, but there is something he is saying. As we ask ourselves, how's your retirement? I first want us to ask this question. Is your retirement advice coming from a bank or a Bible? Is your retirement advice coming from a bank or a Bible? I'm not talking about how you're going to spend your money. Are you looking in the Bible to find out which stocks you should invest in? Well, you're probably going to be disappointed, right? That's not what I'm saying. In terms of the retirement that matters, are you focused on the retirement that's in your bank account, and your investment portfolio, and Social Security accounts, whatever the case might be? Is that where your focus is on getting your investment advice? Is that where your focus is on what retirement looks like for you? Or are you focused on a different kind of retirement? You will see a lot of advertisements for people offering to help with money. I watched one the other day from NerdWallet. There's companies like Edward Jones and Prudential, I think, is one of them. All sorts of different companies like that will help you try and set aside for retirement. They'll give you advice. I remember when I was in school, they taught us about compound interest, and I think even Einstein said compound interest should be considered the eighth wonder of the world. It's amazing if you just set aside a little bit of money early on in life, how much you can end up with eventually. None of that's inherently bad. We see many righteous men in Scripture, both Old and New Testament, who had wealth, had means. But what retirement are we actually investing in the most? In Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 16, I believe we actually read this in our Proverbs class already together. Solomon says it's better, far better, to get wisdom than get gold, understanding than choice silver. He's saying there's something better than the wealth that this world offers. And yet far too often, especially those of us who have not retired yet, far too often it's easy for us to get so focused on setting aside for that future time, trying to be wise with our money, trying to make sure that we take advantage of the 401ks or all these different things that we spend more time thinking about that kind of retirement than thinking about the future that we're going to have past this life. We spend too much time getting advice about our future in this life, and not enough time seeking out advice and wisdom about our future in the next. In Matthew chapter 13 and verse 22, he's explaining another parable of the soils or of the sower, depending on who you ask. He's explaining the different soils and what they mean. And there's one that he describes that probably should hit home for anyone who lives in this country. There's seed that is scattered on a certain area of soil, and it takes root, it sprouts up. We understand the seed is the Word of God. The soil represents the fertile ground of the heart of human beings. And as that seed sprouts up, if we're listening to the parable and we understand the representation, we're excited. This must be fertile soil. The seed has sprouted. But there's other seeds that have sprouted before that. Thorns. We might say weeds or brambles, I don't know, but stuff that no one wants. And you know what that represents in that parable? It represents the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches. And those coming in choke out that new plant that is sprouted, and it becomes unfruitful. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 17 through 19, Paul has something that he wants Timothy to convey to those who are rich in the congregation that he is currently ministering to. He tells Timothy to remind them not to be haughty and not to put their hope in the uncertainty of riches, but instead to do good works, instead to minister to others and put their hope somewhere else. I'm not in any way saying we shouldn't be good stewards of our money. I'm Not in any way saying we shouldn't be putting something aside for retirement, or for those of you who are retired, benefiting from what we have set aside and being smart even with what we have now. But where are we focused? What retirement, if you will, are we focused on? What phase of life? The end of our life here on this earth? Or our life after this earth? Our entire lives, we're told, are as a vapor. And yet sometimes we get so focused on taking care of our needs and our wants in this life that we forget to focus on the next. What kind of retirement are you planning for right now? What kind of retirement are you investing in? Are you focused on right now? As we continue thinking about this question, I want us to ask another question. In some ways, this is more specific to those who have not retired, although I think we can see it applies to both. Not only are we talking about retirement advice, if you will, we also want to talk specifically about investing. Are you investing in a career or a crown? Are you investing in a career or a crown? For those of you who are retired, have you invested in a career or a crown? Goes back to focus. I was talking, I believe it was with Miss Kay earlier this week or last week about World War II. Y'all know I'm a history nerd. As we were talking about that, we got on the subject of how Germany and the United States were different in terms of their manufacturing. Something that was very different was that the U.S. focused more on getting as much made, as much planes, tanks, guns made as possible. Not caring so much if it was great quality, but just trying to get as much of it out there. Whereas the Germans in their industry, they focused more on quality. And as a result, maybe they had better guns, better tanks, better planes, but they weren't able to put out as many. In fact, there's actually something that's very interesting if you go back in the history of World War II. The Americans began to do studies on how long an aircraft would last before it got shot down. And they realized that on average, a plane would get shot down before it had a chance to even rust. So they didn't even paint the planes anymore. Once they figured that out, they stopped painting the planes at all. They would just make them, the metal, the components, and then wouldn't even paint, send it out to the line. That was the American perspective. They wouldn't invest time, they wouldn't invest effort and materials in something that wasn't going to matter. The Germans, they made these awesome things called rockets. Now in World War II, those weren't actually super useful because it was pretty much just one bomb's worth of explosive, but they were scary. They made these things called rockets. By definition, a rocket is meant to go and explode. And that's it. That's the end of the rocket. But the Germans painted their rockets. They were so worried about quality, they would invest the time, the effort, the materials to paint something that was designed for a one-way trip. And as a result, that time, that effort, that material was wasted because they were investing in something that it didn't make any sense to invest in. Are you investing in a career or a crown? I'm not saying we don't do our jobs well for those of us who are in the workforce or in some kind of career path. Even to slaves in the New Testament, the slaves were told, work for your masters, rather. Bondservants, work for your masters as to the Lord and not to men. We're supposed to do our best. But in terms of what you're really focused on, what you care about, what you're investing, not just what you need to do your best, but what you're investing your life in. The choices that you have to either spend more time at the office, spend more time working on projects versus spending time teaching your family about the Bible and studying together about how to reach out to the community. Are you investing more in a career or a crown? In 1 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 25, there Paul talks about an athlete. It seems when we put everything together in the New Testament, Paul, he seemed to be a sports fan, if you will. At their time, sports pretty much looked like the Olympics that we have a version of today. They would have different events like boxing, wrestling, running, things like that. He often uses that as illustrations in his letters. He talks about the athlete, the one who's running a race. He says they have to have self-control. They have to invest in themselves in order to accomplish their goal. And yet Paul says they run for a perishable crown. In Roman culture, they would take usually an olive wreath or something like that, and they would crown the victor, but that crown, it was a plant. It would wither very quickly. There was actually some symbolism in that that was intentional, even among the Romans. They ran for a perishable crown. But Paul says we run for an imperishable crown. We're investing in something better than what will eventually go away. Or at least we should be. Are we? Is that where the focus of your work, your effort, your energy, your money, your time, is that where the focus of it is? Or are you investing in the things of this life? This is true for those who aren't in the workplace, traditionally as we call it anymore either. There's still plenty of things in this life that we can invest in. May not be a career per se, but where's your focus? Where's your investment? If you were to make, going back to business terms, right? You're to make a pie chart. You divide the slices of the pie into where most of your time goes, where most of your effort goes, most of your energy. Where is it? In 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 58, Paul reminds us that our labor is not in vain. If we are working for the kingdom of God, our labor is not in vain. But you know what that implies? If our effort overall, not saying we don't have to put forth some effort to fulfill the responsibilities of this life, please don't misunderstand that. But if our efforts overall are focused here, our labor is in vain. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, a very personal letter that Paul writes to Timothy. Paul knows he is nearing his death. He's an older man at this point. He's had a lot of life experience. A lot of awful life experience at that, at least in a physical sense, but not spiritually. You know what he tells Timothy? As he is thinking about his life, as he is thinking about the end of his life that is approaching, as he is remembering surely all these things that he has told the Corinthians. I know he's talking to Timothy here, but remember that list in Corinthians where he tells them all the things he's gone through, the shipwrecks, the imprisonments, the beatings. And now, in a personal letter to Timothy, he says, you know what? I fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth is laid up for me a crown. No, not a perishable crown like he described for the athlete. No, not silver and gold as Solomon dismissed, saying there was something more important than that. Paul says there is laid up a crown of righteousness. That's what he's investing in. That's what he's working towards. He tells Timothy and the Corinthians and many others in multiple places throughout his letters, I could have been somebody among the Jews. Paul was a rising star among the Jews, politically, socially, economically. Paul could have been somebody in this life. But instead of investing in that, he was working for a crown. Once he discovered where he went wrong, he never lost sight of the goal. If I'm going to invest in something, shouldn't it be something that'll last? my time, my energy, all those things are things that I only have a limited amount of. And yes, there are responsibilities we have to take care of in this life. I'm not saying we quit our jobs and read the Bible 24/7 and let other people pay our bills. Paul talks about that in Thessalonians, right? We have responsibilities we have to take care of. We understand that. But when it comes to the focus of my investment of me, shouldn't I invest in something that lasts? Or am I just painting a rocket that's going to explode and nothing will be left? Thirdly, as we think about this question, how's my retirement? What about the golden years, as we sometimes call them? Will your golden years be in your 80s or eternity? Now, I know 80s is not really the golden years as we talk about. It's usually like the 60s and the 70s. Alliteration, guys. This is just the way it goes. But seriously, the golden years, a lot of times, as we think about the American dream, it's that time at the end of your life where you put in your labor, you get to retire, you have something saved up, hopefully, and you get to enjoy life for a little bit. You get to relax. You get to kind of just do whatever you want to. Some of y'all are in that phase right now where you don't have a lot of the same responsibilities that those who have not yet had the opportunity to retire have. You have more freedom. We look forward to that. We try and exalt that sometimes in society as a goal to pursue. A time where your work is done, you can rest, you can relax. Now, granted, some people, some of y'all included, handle retirement very differently than others. Some people want to just rest and do nothing. Other people are so used to working, they got to do something. They got to do something with their hands. They got to be busy doing something, right? Everyone handles it a little bit differently, but as a society, we have made that into something that's a positive goal. Not that it shouldn't be, at least in a sense. But our rest is not here, brethren. The end, the goal, the reward is not here. The reward is after this. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9, Paul tells the Galatians not to grow weary in doing good. For in due season we will reap if we do not lose heart. In due season. When is that due season? It's the next life. That's when our rest comes. Again, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying it's wrong to retire. At least not from a job as we think of it here in this life. But we don't retire from Christianity just because we retire from our careers here. We don't retire from the work of the kingdom just because we no longer have a job title and a paycheck coming from a specific company. Our goal is not rest here. Do we need rest sometimes? Do we need to relax? Do we need to get away? Do we need to play games and watch movies and do whatever the case might be? Gotten to play dominoes or cards and marbles, different things with some of y'all. I love that kind of thing. We need that as a time of fellowship, as a time of relaxation. We need rest in a limited sense, but we don't get to retire from the work that God has called us to do as long as we're drawing breath in this life. In Hebrews chapter 9 and verses 9 and 10, rather chapter 4, verses 9 and 10, here, the author of Hebrews, he's describing the Israelites, the goal they were pursuing, the rest they were trying to accomplish, the rest in the promised land. And he reminds us that while to an extent they did achieve that rest, that wasn't the final rest God had in mind. But in fact, even now, there remains a rest for the people of God. What is that rest? It's not here. I wouldn't want it to be here, would you? I wouldn't want my goal in retiring, if you will, to be here in this life. Yes, I hope that one day I am able to retire, have a little more freedom. Maybe Liz and I will go travel some places in an RV. I don't know. That would be nice. As long as we're not retiring from the work God has called us to do. Because ultimately, we don't get to rest in this life. Not if we're doing what God says. We always have a job to do. We don't get to check out of the battle. We're soldiers. Yes, physically speaking, you don't recruit people into the military who get past a certain age. They're not able to perform their duties as well. But God's army isn't a physical army. Everyone at every age, at every point in life, with every skill set, with every ability and opportunity before them, everyone has a part to play in the battle that we are called to fight. And we don't get to go AWOL until we are discharged. We have a job to do. In Revelation chapter 14 and verse 13, we have this beautiful message of hope given to the churches in Asia. And in verse 13 of that chapter, John, through inspiration in this vision, he passes on a message to us. He says, "Blessed are the dead who die from this point on in the Lord, that they may rest from their labors." That's when we get to rest. No temptation, no suffering, no more work to do. Just fellowship. Perfect unity with God, with one another. That's the rest. That's the retirement we're looking for. That's the goal. Am I seeking a restful paradise here? Or do I plan to work till I drop? Not in a physical career. Do I plan to keep working? Whatever that looks like, it's not going to look the same for everyone. But everyone can do something. Everyone can have influence. Everyone can spread the light. Be that light on a hill. You know, I think about some people that I've known in my life that got toward the end of their lives and didn't feel like they were doing anything. Didn't feel like there was much they could accomplish. And yet, just being there, being faithful, having the heart that they had, that counts as something. Because that's what they could do. What can you do? Where is your retirement focused? Those of you who are still working, what's your goal? Those of you who have already retired, in the sense of this life, what's your goal? How's your retirement this morning? If we can help you to understand, if we can help you to find the retirement advice offered in Scripture, if we can help encourage you and remind you of the goal, we always want to be willing to do that. If there's something specific we can help you with or pray with you over, please let it be known as we stand and sing together. I gave my life for thee.